Karibu kwenye MSASA, where we talk to successful people about failure.
Over the last couple of, let's say 5 years, 5 years, or should I say since Magufuli came into power, kitu kimoja ambacho Watanzania wengi tumekuwa tukikisema ukiulizwa, oya, uko poa, mambo vipi? Tupo, tunapambana. Na binafsi, as I'm growing up and I am adulting, kule kupambana kuko kama hakuishi yani maisha ni kupambana. Mwanaume ni kupambana. And it comes with everything, the good and the bad. Something else though that I'm learning is being a student of life is one of the most fulfilling experiences ever. Because with life, there is a lot of good, and the good is influenced by people. And I really like people. I'm starting to really, really like people because people are interesting. They're unique. They're different. They're so diverse. There are things we connect on and there are things we don't connect on. And I like that because I like cocktails of things. I like it when things that may not always be so obvious are put in the same thing and they're just delicious. Like, nikikumbuka ile Milo breakfast or random lunches that once in a while I get to make and I'm never able to make it the same way. It's because nilifungua friji kuka kuna karoti ambayo iko nusu, afu kuna hoho moja, afu hamna nyanya lakini kuna vitunguu na vitunguu saumu vingi. And then I mix it up and it works. Mm-hmm. Today our guest is a guest who I think is a unique mix of different experiences. A man of science, a man of data, and a man of God. Arthur, karibu. I know personally my experience with religion is still a process of discovery.
Yeah.
It's like a very long discovery call that has a lot of breaks in between. I am victim to blaming God for some things not going my way. Afpaka namsusia mshikaji. And then I catch myself and then najirudia. And then, I have those. And then also, iyo kitu kwamba kwa mfano, mimi nimezaliwa Mlutheri.
Okay.
So I identify as Mlutheri. Okay. But every now and then I ask myself, hivi ningechagua, and you say something interesting where, you're born into something, but then eventually you have to decide, proactively make the decision kwamba is this something that you identify with going forward au umerithishwa kitu ambacho you may or may not be living your truth. With most journeys, especially religious ones, can you remember a moment that made you want to fight even harder to continue the journey up until to the level that you are now? I mean, you're still in discovery, but you're in a much different level of discovery than most of us.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that because fight is the right word. When did I need to fight? And the reason I'll say that the word fight is appropriate is because for me, it was when I was confronted with a very real temptation.
Okay.
To get offended at a God I don't understand. Meaning things happened and things happen that don't make sense to you. Things happen that are totally left field that you'd be like, okay, if there is a God, how in the world could this ever have happened? And if that is the case, then that temptation is a temptation that I personally needed to fight almost every day for a good couple of years to say. And then temptation is getting offended at God. Because if up until that point, I was fully convinced that this is God, this is who he is, he's good, not just to me, he's good to humanity, in spite of the failures and the sufferings of the world. And because X, Y, and Z have happened to me, now do I throw that deep conviction that I have away? And throwing that away would actually mean the ground beneath me is going. Because before I wasn't sure of my faith. And then it became the solid ground I stood on. And now in the face of temptation of getting offended at God and setting him aside, am I going to break down the very solid ground that he helped build underneath me?
When you say getting offended by God, what do you mean? Do you mean like any kwamba you feel like he hasn't done right by you? Or
that he has done things which don't make sense to me.
Okay.
And he has not, like you're saying, not done right by me, but again, by my very human standards and judgment.
Yeah.
But it's a fight because that line of thinking is very strong, and it can really draw you away from the very relationship that you prized. Being for me personally, it was my relationship with God. And I needed to fight day by day to ensure that when those thoughts come to say, okay, you say God is fair and he's good, but X, Y, and Z have happened. Why have they happened? Is God really good? Because if he is good and he's all powerful and sovereign as you believe, it means that he allowed what happened to happen. He has allowed what has happening or keep on happening to happen. So how do you love a God like that? How do you call him fair? How do you worship someone who isn't for you by my definition?
How do you?
By submitting and submitting. They say, people will say I trust God, right? Or people will say that I trust you, Elisha, as the leader of this company, for example. But trust is only put to the test when or rather you go through a situation where it becomes difficult to trust the very person or the thing that you've been trusting in. And trust gets tested. And I've come to learn that trust is extreme sports. It's extreme sports when it gets severely tested to the point where it's like, okay, if you say you trust God, it means you at some point will have to be okay with not understanding everything. And yeah, go ahead.
That's very interesting. I think it's very interesting also coming from you. Why? Because you're a very analytical person, though.
Exactly.
Right? Like everything has to be objective.
Correct.
1 + 2 is 3, not 4, not 3.5. And you do data and insights and, for a living, right?
Yeah.
And what you do, the work you do, informs other people to make the right decisions for their businesses, and business is a numbers game.
Correct.
How is it, Sasa Kwamba, you can be so objective and so logical and numerical, right? Like, na huku kwingine, I'm not sure. Can you be as logical with faith?
In a nutshell, and just so the answer is brief, no, you can't. And the reason why, and again, that's why I called it a fight. It's still a fight because it's almost like I'm going against the grain of how I'm wired. I'm wired logical, objective. That's essentially a large part of my life. But on this side, trust is not logical. Trust isn't founded on data. There's no data report that I got from God to explain why X, Y, and Z is the way that it is, or why life is going the way that it is. That report, if it was released, it didn't come to me. And the reason why faith is not logical or analytical or based on data, because the only data we have is what's in the Bible.
Right.
And even when we ask God why, 99% of the time is you will not get an answer. So it's not, and I don't want to make it sound like it's blind faith, but for me personally, in the scriptures, I encountered a person who I believe to be trustworthy. When the data did not align with that, I had to fight and make a decision to say, I am still going to trust in this person who I discovered. and in his character and not in the data.
Right.
And faith will 99% of the time not be logical, at least in the present.
Right. Wow. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Arthur, what has been your best failure?
Best failure. Best failure, I would say, I think not getting a job directly after university.
Okay. Oh, tell me about that. What do you mean?
And I would say I'm calling it a failure, but it's not like I had control over it. But anyway, the reason why I'll say is so I graduated from university, studied 4 years, and it was a good institution. And I'd say 90% of the people that I graduated with had jobs even before they graduated. So going into life with that expectation, I was like, okay, as soon as I graduate, like within a month or two, surely. Exactly. Mambo yateji. So someone will say, there's a star. Let me hire him.
Computer science.
Whatever it may be. I was like, okay, it's fine. 1 month, I'll wait.
Yeah.
2 months, I'll wait. After 3, 4, 5 months, I think the reality of the mindset I had confronted me face to face. And the mindset I had was one that was entitled, for lack of a better word.
Okay.
One that expected the world to yield to my big, lofty thoughts and dreams that I had in my head, which it didn't work out that way for one reason or another. And I call that a good failure is because from that, I learned a lesson, which I carry till today, which is it's not, first of all, I overcame the entitlement and the loftiness of whatever it may be.
It humbled you?
It humbled me, correct. It humbled me. And in that humility, I discovered a sort of tenacity and a mindset that was more ready, let's say, for any life experience. Particularly in the work field, in the career field.
Right.
Any life experience, even if it didn't match my standards. Because had I received whatever that red carpet welcome that I thought I was going to get, I would have had to learn that lesson much harder later in life when the stakes are higher. When I have a family, kids, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
Then you come encounter face to face with your entitlement and your whatever it may be, which isn't going to feed a growth mindset. It's going to take away from it. So that period of time, I had a lot of undoing in my mind to say, okay, if you're going to start work, you should start work with the right mindset.
Right.
And that right mindset is, it's a privilege to work.
Yeah.
I'm working. Whatever they ask me to do, even if it's not in line with what it is I thought initially what life would look like, to accept that.
How long did it take to get a job?
About 7 or 8 months. But it was 7 or 8 months longer than I expected.
Right, because you expected
immediately.
Immediately,
right?
yeah.
And that, so it's different from someone who didn't expect it.
Yeah.
Even if we had the same time window, I probably went through much more suffering than the person who was actually more open to opportunities.
So, for instance, did you get it in a slightly different way as a result of that? Or was it just a regular application? You got called in?
It was many applications, but it was a different way in the sense that it was a job in Tanzania, and I didn't live in Tanzania at the time.
Oh, right. At the time, you didn't live in Tanzania.
Yes, I lived in Eswatini, Swaziland,
okay,
formerly called. That's where I lived, and that's where most of my life was based.
Okay.
So I think the undoing of my mindset made me even open to move. By the way, my parents were Tanzanian.
Okay.
So that's why that's the connection between why I ended up in Tanzania.
Okay.
Because I'm a Tanzanian citizen and have been my whole life.
Okay.
Even though I grew up and was born somewhere else.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was that you getting out of your comfort zone, or?
Yeah, it was going on an adventure.
It was going on an adventure.
Yeah, it was going on an adventure, and it has been a wonderful adventure.
Okay.
So I'm really glad that I came face to face with that mindset much earlier on in my life.
Okay. Did the job meet your standard, or did it eventually become a standard?
It eventually did. Initially, it had some parts of it which I felt were, which I would have struggled with had I been entitled, quote unquote. But because I already overcame that hurdle, I was much more open-minded, but also that attitude did not, any misaligning of expectations did not leak into my attitude to work, which means I still worked faithfully.
Right.
I still brought my all every single day,
Right.
even though it wasn't, let's say, the best thing that I envisioned in my mind. But having the right kind of mindset provided me with the strength to show up every single day and to perform at my best every single day, even though things are not aligned to my expectations. Which, had I had a different mindset, I don't think I would have had the level of results that I experienced because of the right kind of attitude. Yeah.
And this mindset, was it influenced by any particular thing other than the fact that you were not getting a gig?
I think it was influenced by, because at some point I also had to come face to face with the fact that even though my mindset was up here, I observed the life of those closest to me. And at the time, my mother, who was very close to me, had gone through difficult challenges in her life, but she had the right kind of mindset, because I have observed, reflecting, 8 months at home, lots of time to reflect, that she exhibited a kind of mindset that I didn't have, which was way more resilient, way more positive, way more pleasant than I did. And
by pleasant, do you mean positive? Or what do you mean by pleasant?
I mean, pleasant is, if things aren't going your way, how do you act?
Okay.
Are you still a pleasant human being? Or are you one who would complain, get miserable, get angry, whatever it may be? So that's what I mean by pleasant.
Okay.
And she exhibited a mindset that was way more, I realized I didn't have it.
Okay.
So that as well was part of what would have, or was influencing how I acted.
Okay. Have you ever gotten advice from someone and you're like, have you ever gotten advice from someone that you took and then very soon later realized that, that was some really bad advice?
I may have to pick my words. Yeah, I have received advice.
What's the worst advice you've ever gotten?
Okay. The worst advice would have been, or is rather, you need to fight, and I'm thinking of how to frame it, because you need to fight for what is yours.
You need to fight for what is yours?
Yes.
Okay, why is that bad advice?
It's bad advice because you need to fight for what you believe is yours by your current state, experiences, and limited line of sight. So I do not discount the fact of working hard and being tenacious in what you believe in, right? Because we're all driven by vision. That's what we need to keep driving towards. But the fighting for what is yours is oftentimes at the expense of character.
Okay.
Not oftentimes. Let me just, in the way that I applied that advice was at the expense of character. Meaning, I was like, okay, let me fight for what is mine.
Okay.
But it was actually what I believed to be mine at the time, and it really wasn't mine. And also, it compromised character just to fight for this thing. And fighting in that regard is energy being expensed to do something which was really self-centered.
So,
Okay.
correct me.
Yeah.
Karibu kwenye MSASA, where we talk to successful people about failure.
I'm not sure I follow.
Yeah.
You said you need to fight for what is yours is bad advice.
No, it was bad advice.
It was bad advice.
Because of how I applied it.
Because of how you applied it.
Yeah. Because there is an aspect of that advice which is very
Right.
wise.
Context matters.
Correct, yes,
Yeah. And then what you're saying is you need to fight for what you believe is yours.
I was saying the place where I went wrong is because I was fighting for what I believed was mine based off of my limited.
So your belief was the limitation.
My belief of it was the limitation, as well as my execution thereof, based off of the advice I received. Yeah.
Okay, so what was the right way to go about that?
I think, well, if you were to ask me this question 5 years ago, I would have responded differently.
Right. You're always evolving.
I'm always evolving.
Yeah.
5 years ago, I would have said, I would have first and foremost ensured that I was doing it for the right motives.
Okay.
Fighting for this thing for the right motives. Fighting for it for the right outcomes, and ultimately ensuring that at least to some degree I was not compromising my values.
Okay.
Right. But that was 5 years ago.
Okay.
Which is it was a very healthy place from where I was.
Okay.
To get to that point.
Okay.
But 5 years into the future, I would say that in my journey with me walking with God, I realized that even the good things, even something that I can fully deem as being wonderful, and other people would agree with me that this is wonderful, may not necessarily be what God is telling you is yours.
Okay.
Meaning that the standard by which I would measure a thing being appropriate or right and mine would be if God is saying that.
And how do you know he's saying
it? So that's why it's the longer. Again, we have how many minutes? Because we could carry on this conversation for days, but
is it in some way connected to a calling?
Purpose.
A purpose.
A purpose, but also beyond a purpose, a desire to live out the purpose that has already been laid out for you.
A desire to live out.
Even if it's in opposition to what you deem to be best today.
Wow. That is a lot to chew on.
It's a lot. I'm still chewing on it. Still learning that lesson, but yeah. In the limited time we have, that's how I wouldn't be able to unpack that any further. Yeah.
In the context of the work you do with data, what kind of movies do you like?
So movies, I enjoy a good drama. Thriller. No, not drama. No, drama and thriller.
Okay.
Those are the genres I like. Something that tests the mind a bit. So yeah.
And it's exciting.
Yeah. And then Marvel movies. Unfortunately,
that's not a bad thing.
Well, I mean, many people have much to say about Marvel movies, but I don't read the comics, so I have no reference point.
Yeah.
So Marvel movies.
Yeah. If you were to produce a movie about yourself, what would the title be?
What would the title be? The Curious Case of Arthur Kyara.
Curious Case of Arthur Kyara.
No, I'm just referencing the Curious Case of Benjamin Button.
All right.
But it would be something, I guess, to that regard, because I'd say, my life has been non-linear in that regard. If I were to write a story about my life 10 years ago, there'll be many chapters that I've lived which I wouldn't be in there. So yeah, I think something that is themed along the lines of the curious case of something would be the name that I would give my life.
It's a good title.
Yeah.
So I want us to move on to a particularly very interesting segment of our show.
Yeah.
Inaitwa Nje ya Boxi. And in today's particular episode, I would like us to talk about going to market. I guess in your context, it's route to market.
Yeah.
That's the lingo you would use. So help paint a picture for me and for anybody else who would be watching this. Kwenye context ya Tanzania, if you are in FMCG, right, you have a fast-moving consumable product. What are the checkpoints? And, from an analytical standpoint, but also from an experience standpoint, what are the checkpoints you definitely need to consider when you're trying to make mpango mkakati wa kuingia sokoni?
Yeah. So first and foremost is location. And a location is the location of the product that you're trying to sell. And we're talking physical product.
Right.
The location of that product and the location of the...
Let's say the product is sugar.
Sugar.
Yeah.
Okay. So the factory and the place or the area in which you want your product to consistently be available.
Okay.
And in the context of Tanzania, if you've grown up in Dar es Salaam and lived in Dar es Salaam your whole life, you may not have context of just how rural, and let me say, unlike Dar es Salaam, the rest of Tanzania is.
Yes. So kuna tunaishi maisha tofauti kabisa.
Kabisa.
Yeah.
And traveling around the country and seeing that reality makes me realize that the things that you build, the systems you build, the route to market strategies need to encompass that majority, the reality of that majority.
Okay.
Because that's where people are. We may say there's a lot of people in Dar es Salaam, but that's less than 10% or at least 10% of the
whole country.
Population. So from a rural context, for example, how you do get your product to where it needs to be is, first of all, where is your factory and where is the area that you want to supply?
Okay.
In between that point, what's that distance? And you need to start thinking distribution. How am I going to get the product to that place?
Right.
It will not be efficient for you to drive back and forth to a place that is, let's say, 200 kilometers away. But 200 kilometers away, you have people living there and you have activity taking place and you have consumption happening. So the ideal thing would be to set up a distribution point within that vicinity, the vicinity of interest.
Right.
And
so location is location of the factory.
Yep.
Location is also location of
the endpoint.
The endpoint?
The consumer, let's say.
The consumer. And the pickup point.
The distribution point.
The distribution point.
I mean, we call it a distribution point, but a place where you'll be able to ship a large consignment of stock, and from that point, then distribute into the area.
Okay.
That's the most efficient way of doing it.
Okay.
And in rural areas, or rather in most of Tanzania, we tend to locate ourselves around centers.
Okay.
So even though it's vastly rural, there'll be centers of activity and centers of people. So you want a distributor that will be close by.
Okay, so location.
Location and a distribution point that is quite central to the surrounding areas.
Right.
That's number 2. And number 3, and I'm saying this because, yes, I work in data, but data is very important.
Okay.
Because the data is actually what would ensure that if you place a distribution point, or if you look for an investor to invest in a distribution point in the middle of, or rather, let's say in a rural area, that they'll make enough money for their business to survive. And the kind of data you need is what are the number of outlets or shops that are in the area? What's the population of the area? What's the average income of that area if available?
Socioeconomic class.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Even in the lower sections of society, they are strata, meaning there are levels. And to know what those levels are. what is the
Are those like LSMs?
LSMs is.
Right.
So even in the lower LSMs, there's still nuances which you need to consider if you're opening up a business. Now, if something is as uniform as sugar, you may have other distributors because sugar is easy to get, and sugar will. So you need to have data on the competitors and the people who are supplying the same thing in the area, because they'll be competing for the same pie. And then also having data around how much petrol it takes to get to that area or to distribute in that area effectively. Because even though I can have a center, that center can be 20 or 30 kilometers away from the next center. How much would constant distribution daily between those 2 points cost? And then...
So basically managing your logistics.
Managing your logistics and the cost of running the business.
Yes.
As well as now modeling all of that in a way that would ensure that at the end of the month, at least the person who has invested X million will be able to take something home.
Okay.
So I'd say it's location.
Yes.
And
distribution
points and having the right amount of data.
Okay.
And then over and above that, which sometimes gets overlooked, is financial and business acumen for the person who's to open the business.
Okay.
Because we sometimes assume that someone who has capital knows how to run a business. Now, someone can have capital, they can invest 50 million today, open a distributor in a perfect area that would ensure their profitability, but they do not know how to manage their books. Which means when they see money coming in, they think that, oh, that money is mine.
Kuna faida
here. There's no accounting. So you begin to take money out of the business. You're like, oh, okay, some expenses have creeped in, let me spend. And you keep spending and you keep spending. But you're slowly sucking out the very capital that you placed into the business. And the unfortunate thing is that business will then begin to die a slow death. So in the long-term thinking of getting a product into a place, they should be either education or ensuring that the principles of running a business and managing books of a business should be provided.
And what about things like competition and marketing and stuff like that? Yeah.
So competition is very important. It's important because, first and foremost, we find ourselves in a very competitive environment as Tanzania.
Yeah.
And because consumers have choice, whatever product you're putting out there, and I'm talking FMCG.
Yeah.
Whatever product you're putting out there, you need to ensure that you're able to influence the consumer's choice in one way or another. One of those ways is marketing.
Right.
Right?
Promotions and discounts
exactly.
and bundles and...
Correct.
Matangazo.
Yep. And in a vast majority of this country, above the line may not be as effective. So you need to think of innovative ways of going below the line to ensure that you're top of mind and the consumer chooses you over the competitor. Because first and foremost, in the majority of Tanzania where consumption is happening, it's happening regardless of whether you're there or not. So you need to ensure that you go the extra mile to ensure that your product is available and known. So yes, below the line marketing, promotions, activities, etc., is a very key aspect of that. Another key aspect as well would be recognizing the economic situation of the person and appropriately pricing your product
according to their...
Yes.
Yeah. So this could be what, from an FMCG standpoint, would this be like having different sizes?
It could be sizes, definitely.
Yeah.
Ensuring that at least I'm providing something that the person who has, let's say, 1,000 or 2,000 shillings in their pocket will be able to leave with my product. I think if you've gone to certain dukas, you'll see that you can even have blue band that's enough for just one use.
Yeah, kidogo tu.
Kidogo, exactly. Or people would section off sugar and they'll section it off into sachets so that someone can come and buy.
Au kuna sukari ya kupima.
Exactly.
Yeah, because it's not always packaged.
It's not always packaged. Or someone would have a box of tea bag and you go and buy a tea bag. But the person has only enough money to buy a tea bag a day. So that's another form of ensuring that your product flows, is to say, okay, I recognize that the consumers in this area, this daily income is X amount. How do I ensure that I have a product, like you're saying, at the right price, but also at the right pack size or amount that they'll be able to come and purchase, even if it's every day, and I still will also be able to benefit from that. So that's it's not necessarily marketing, but it's a kind of marketing because you're actually tailoring the product
to your consumer. Yes, so it's not marketing as much as it is understanding your market, I guess.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that goes back to data, right?
That goes back to data.
Yeah.
Okay. How effective have you ever been able to use data to affect a marketing effort?
How effective? Can you rephrase the question?
Sure. Data is crucial.
Correct.
Because it helps us to make informed decisions and take calculated risks. But similar to business decisions, sometimes really good marketing ideas are not driven by data.
Correct.
Yeah, they're driven by gut instincts and the deep understanding of who your audience is.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you think of a time or share a moment when these two worked really well?
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. Yes. So there was a time we carried out an exercise in the lake zone, and part of the task was to collect overall census data. Now, for anyone who knows anything about census data, first of all, it's very expensive.
Yeah.
Because you're literally going and collecting data on every, exactly. But it was census data for outlet information.
Okay.
In a particular area, not widespread, but in a particular area. So it was an exercise to go and just find out what kind of data is being, not data, sorry, but what's the outlet landscape and what are the kind of people that, what products are people buying, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So in that particular segment where we did the study, data came through, which made us actually realize the shifting trend in product preference in a particular area. When that data gets presented to, let's say, marketing, or for example, not for example, this is what happened. They were then able to say, oh, actually, we can then tailor the messaging in this particular area in line with this gap that we're seeing in the data.
Right.
In which case, there was budget to do a campaign, but the campaign would have just been generic, meaning whatever was happening throughout the country. But because there was a particular unique issue, or let's say shift in trend, which we were observing in a particular area, the end result was a tailored campaign to address that.
Okay.
Yeah.
The specific people in that specific area.
That particular area.
Okay. And you ended up doing like a below the line approach?
So at that time, it was a promotion, which is below the line, I'm assuming.
Ish.
Yeah. A particular tailored promotion, as well as more visibility in terms of POS and in-store communication, outlet posters.
So location, distribution, data, data,
And
business acumen, understanding your market, understanding your audience, data.
I wouldn't say having data, but serving your audience.
Serving your audience.
Yes. Because ultimately you want to serve them.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Thank you, Arthur.
Cool.
Thank you so much for coming here today.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah. Asante sana.
Cool.
Cheers.
Karibu kwenye MSASA, where we talk to successful people about failure.